Hi and welcome back to Code Emily. Today we're going to talk about fetching data from an API and then displaying it in a React component. We're going to use useEffect, useState, and we're going to fetch from the Pokemon API. If you're liking this channel so far, don't forget to subscribe. I put out videos every week all about React, JavaScript, and just being a software engineer.
And it would mean a lot to me.
But for now, let's get started. Here I have a simple app up and started using Vite. On the left I have my code, and on the right I have my browser. Inside this app.jsx file, what we're doing is using the useEffect hook to fetch data from the Pokemon API. In my last video, I cover all things useEffect, ins and outs of how it works, so definitely go back and watch that if you're not 100% sure on how useEffect works yet. As a quick little recap, the way that this is working with useEffect here is that useEffect gets called on the first render of this component because I have this empty dependency array. If I didn't have that empty dependency array, useEffect would get called on every single time the component renders. We're calling fetch inside of useEffect, and then we're setting the response to the right JSON format, and then we're updating the Pokemon data state to the data that we fetched from the API. And then I'm printing out Pokemon data using console.log. We open up our DevTools in our browser. We can see that when this component first renders, Pokemon data is set to null, which makes sense because we set the initial value to be null. And then once this fetch completes and updates Pokemon data, we're seeing here this object with all of our Pokemon data. So the results in here print out all of these different Pokemon. Let's use this data and actually display it inside of our component. The first thing we'll do is put in some curly braces. As we know about JSX, if we put curly braces in, that's where we can put JavaScript within our HTML. First, I'm going to do a check for if Pokemon data exists yet, because when this page originally renders, it's null. And if I were to do something like this, Pokemon data results and call results directly right away, this actually would error because the original value of Pokemon data is null. So we want to first check if Pokemon data exists. So what I'm going to do is say Pokemon data and two ands. Whenever Pokemon data is there, we'll be displaying something. For example, I'll just print out a div here to show you exactly what I mean. You can see when Pokemon data is there, it'll print out this div that says Pokemon data exists. So let's replace this div with a map where we're going to map out all of the results coming from this Pokemon API. I'll write Pokemon data .results.map. For each Pokemon, we're going to be returning a div. And inside of this div, we're going to be outputting Pokemon.name so that then we have all of our Pokemon names listed in a row. So I'll write Pokemon. And then another thing that's important to know about is keys within maps. Since we have a list of data that's going to be stagnant, it's always going to be the same, we actually can use the index for the key. In map, the first result is of course the item in the array that you're on. The second result is the index that you're at currently. I am going to set a key, which is index. Which is, like I said, totally fine for this type of thing. However, if you're ever using map with data that will likely change, you don't want to use the index as the key. Because if one item is deleted, the index will be messed up, and the whole point of keys is to improve performance within React. I'll make a video all about the importance of keys with maps, but just want to touch on that quickly. So now we have all of our Pokemon names listed out. What if we took it one step further? If we take a look at the results that we're given in these dev tools, we see that each of these items also has a URL. So inside of each one of these results, we actually can get the abilities that Pokemon has. In order to call these APIs, we need another useEffect. What we're going to do is replace this div with a component and put some logic within that component to fetch more details. So what I'm going to do is go into my components folder and I'm going to create a new file called Pokemon.jsx. And then I'll start writing my component and I'll write const Pokemon equals. For now, I'll just return a div, and the two props that we're going to be grabbing are going to be name and URL. So let's go into here and rewrite this. I'm going to import Pokemon from .asset/component/Pokemon, and then I'm going to replace this div with Pokemon, and I'm going to add name equals Pokemon.name. I'll get rid of this. And then I'm going to add URL equals Pokemon.url. Instead of returning that div that we were returning before, we're returning a new component called Pokemon where we're passing down name and URL as props. Let's build out our Pokemon component. We have these two props, which I'm grabbing via destructuring. If you're not sure about how destructuring works, I have a video linked right up above. First thing I'm going to do is import useEffect and useState. So import useEffect, useState from React. What if we didn't want to render the abilities for every single one of these Pokemon? What if we wanted a button that says show more details? So that we're not making 10 API calls when we might not even need to make any. When you're developing on the front end, it's really important to think about how many API calls you're making because that can slow things down. Oh, and I have to remember to do my export default Pokemon because otherwise this app.jsx file won't be able to import Pokemon. I'm going to put in an H2. I'm going to render out name here. Actually, I'm going to change it to H4 so that it's different than the header. Now we have the name of each Pokemon, and let's add a button. We can just use the plain old HTML button tag. And what this button is going to be is a button that says show more details. I understand that this does not look pretty, but that's not what we care about in this tutorial. So I'm going to add some state here for the logic for showing more details or not. So I'm going to do const show more and then comma set show more. I'm going to set this equal to, I'm going to set the initial state to false because when we first load it up, we don't want to show more details. We have this use state for show more and set show more. Inside of this button, what we're going to do is write on click. On click, we're going to put set show more to true. And I'll just put a little const.log to show us what's going on. Const.logging show more. So originally you could see that this is rendering false 10 times, but when I click show more details on the first one, for example, you'll see one true. I do that for another one, you'll see that changes to true, which is exactly what we want. Let's put that use effect into play. First, let's add state for the Pokemon details data. So I'll write const Pokemon details data, comma set Pokemon details data, and I'm going to set this equal to use state with the initial value of null. And now that we have this, we can add our useEffect where we're calling the API. The way that we do that is we just call the useEffect function within our file. So I'll write useEffect, the function, and we'll make sure that we add a dependency array. Since we're going to be updating this state after we fetch, if we don't add that dependency array, we'll actually just get an endless loop of fetching, which is, you're going to notice really quickly. Inside of this useEffect, we'll do our fetch. So we'll fetch that URL that we passed on as a prop. And then after our fetch, what we do is write a dot then, where we change the response format to be in our correct JSON format. So res.json, we call that on the results. And then we do one more dot then, we'll use the variable data, and then we'll set Pokemon details data equal to that data that we're getting from the API. So if I just const.log Pokemon details data, I can now see all these results listing out the abilities for these 10 Pokemon. However, there's one issue with this. We only want to call this API when show more details was clicked. So we're going to have this use effect be based on show more. And inside of here, we're going to put an if statement that says if show more, then we fetch. So what this use effect is now going to do is we're going to go into the use effect on the first render where it will see if show more, and that'll be set equal to false, but then it also gets called when the show more state updates. So if I refresh the page, initially we'll see the 10 nulls, which is definitely what we want. And then if we click show more details on the first one, yay, we get the results. We get the abilities, etc. The last thing that we're going to do is we're just going to map out these abilities based on when you click show more details. So here, I'm going to check for Pokemon details data and say if that is there, then we're going to do Pokemon details data dot abilities dot map. And for each ability, we're just going to print out a div and write out ability dot name, and also make sure to add that key, otherwise React will be mad at us. gonna throw this into a function so that we have a little bit more clarity into what's going on. And let's see if this worked. So let's hit show more details. Not work. Oh, that's because we have to do ability.ability.name. And that worked, yay! So we show more details for all these. A lot of them actually have similar abilities. And that is how we do it. Thank you so much for watching. The next video I'm going to be putting out is all about using style components within React. So stay tuned for that. Bye.